If you put something in a group chat, assume that some scumbag is going to leak it in an effort to try to cause you harm or cause your family harm. But the reality is that kids do stupid things, especially young boys. They tell edgy, offensive jokes. Like, that's what kids do. And I really don't want us to grow up in a country where a kid telling a stupid joke, telling a very offensive stupid joke, is cause to ruin their lives.
All right. Ooh. Look. I got that wow. Who wants some hands up right now? We got that. Turn it up loud. I know you're wondering how. I got that wow.
At the top of the show, we had JD Vance excusing a bunch of people in the Young Republicans Club, sending what we can even just loosely call offensive text messages to each other in a chat app. We're going to be talking about that later in the show, but I'm Claire Potter.
And I'm Neil Young.
And this is the Men Will Be Boys edition of the Political Junkie podcast. And we're going to begin as we normally do with the news summary. We could not start anywhere else but the Amazon Web Services outage early in the week. And apparently there was a coding flaw or something at the data center in Northern Virginia. Anyway, it brought the whole system down. What was really astonishing was the number of services it took offline. Neil, what were you missing on that day?
Well, I didn't even notice it until later, so I don't know that I was, but I think the vulnerability here is really alarming because of just how much we depend on these things, and also how these things might be particularly vulnerable to foreign attacks.
Right.
What were you missing, Claire, when this happened?
Well, Wordle went down. Yeah.
Heavens.
But this was interesting. So Wordle went down, Venmo went down. There were some aspects of Hulu that weren't working properly. There were some aspects of Netflix that weren't working properly. And the thing that people were really screaming about on Facebook was that Canvas, the learning management system that almost everybody uses on every campus, went down. And what was astonishing to me about that is people just didn't know what to do. And, you know, Neil, you're young enough that you came in on a lot of the internet stuff, but I think old enough to remember a time when readings were on paper, and if something went wrong, you just came into class and taught anyway. Well, all kinds of people were just falling apart because Canvas was gone.
Yeah, I feel like I really like being the age I am because, like, for example, when I was in college was when my freshman year was the first year that my university automatically gave email addresses to incoming students. The older students had them if they went and requested them. And so that's just one detail I always like to share that sort of speaks to like being on the cusp of a generational shift that happened when I was really like a young adult. And so it is sort of stunning to me to hear people who are rendered so like that are paralyzed basically by these moments and don't know how to shift to like a non-digital existence. If my Netflix had gone down, oh, you would have heard about it though, I will say.
Well, yeah, exactly. But, you know, Venmo, I mean, a lot of people live on Venmo.
Sure.
People pay their rent on Venmo. So it was fascinating to me how many very different services went down. And apparently this center in Northern Virginia, there had been some kind of coding error where it was not, it's like a post office almost, that it receives signals, something asking for an address, and that center supplies the address and then sends it on to the next stage. It really, it made the internet seem quite naked, but I agree with you, also quite vulnerable. And the idea that actually this country is being held hostage to a few service providers and their various farms is really astonishing to me.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but the big destruction this week is Donald Trump, who is literally destroying Washington, D.C. in what appears to be an impulsive project, creating a ballroom for the White House for which he feels he must demolish the entire East Wing. Now, he said he was only going to demolish a portion of the East Wing. I don't know what happened, whether he was wrong about that or whether once they started tearing the East Wing apart, things just started to crumble and they realized they had to take the whole thing down. So the project has expanded beyond its original scope. And Trump says the ballroom that he's going to build will cost $250 million, or maybe $300 million, maybe $350 million, not sure. Now, the East Wing has not been there forever. It was not built by Thomas Jefferson. It was originally built in 1902 by Theodore Roosevelt, and it was expanded in 1942 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But there's sort of two things coming out of this story, right, Neil? One is Trump just taking apart the nation. I mean, it's like a metaphor. But
Literally.
The other thing is that he has a history of doing stuff like this, right?
Yes. I mean, is there a more apt visual than this crane destroying a portion of the White House? I mean, it is a symbol of what he does in everything in his life and what he's doing to the country itself. I mean, you said that, he had said that he wasn't going to demolish the whole thing. Well, just 4 months ago in July, he said he wasn't going to touch the White House, that it would be added on to. So this is a pathological liar who's never held to account for his words and who does things at a whim. I mean, a lot of the reporting is suggesting that literally this was a change in his decision making a couple of days ago, and that this White House jumped to fulfill the latest whimsy he had. This is absolutely gut-wrenching to me to see. I mean, these visuals are just so horrific. There's lots of horrible things happening, obviously, and this is certainly not the most terrifying thing that his administration is bringing about. But like, it does seem such like a visual that I am shocked is not causing more Americans to rise up. I mean, can you imagine Obama moving a statue? It would have been
Right.
the only news on Fox News for a week. And he's literally tearing apart this, supposedly sacred building, and no one's doing a thing about it. But yeah, he has a long history of tearing down things. He did this in New York City whenever he wanted to build, his monstrous glass towers. He took the wrecking ball to some really landmark pieces of architecture.
Well, and of course, the big one was the Bonwit-Teller building. And of course, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast won't even know what a department store was. But Bonwit-Teller was like one of the queens of department stores. It was one of the first ones to be built above 34th Street. And it had beautiful, beautiful Art Deco panels all over it. And so when he got permission to take it down to build Trump Tower, Donald Trump said he would preserve the panels and that they would go to a museum. And of course they didn't. He just brought in the wrecking ball and he destroyed them. And it's a real sort of preview of internet culture. Remember Mark Zuckerberg once said, move fast and break things, which is what they do. I mean, they just, like they took all our books and trained AI on it. And it's like, oh yeah, we'll give you a few $1 million afterwards. Well, that's what Trump has been doing his whole life. I do think there is something interesting about destroying the East Wing, which is in the past several decades, the East Wing is where the First Lady and her staff go. Where's the First Lady, Neil?
Well, this is exactly what I wanted us to discuss next, because I really think this invites some psychological analysis. I mean, it seems on some level like something of a psychosexual dimension is part of this brutal attack, right? Like that he has virtually no relationship with the woman who's married to him. I don't believe she's visible at all. I mean, is she even in Washington, D.C.? If she is, she's probably at the far end of that big structure, maybe in the exact place where the wrecking ball just did its work. But I mean, this is not a very difficult text to read for its psychological dimensions, is it, Claire?
No, it really isn't. While on the one hand, I think we could probably all agree that in 2025, the role of First Lady or Second Lady is really culturally, socially, economically outmoded. Nevertheless, each First Lady has tried to do something to make that office hers, to make it meaningful, to take advantage of the bully pulpit. Melania Trump stays in Manhattan, in her home. When she's down in Washington, rumor has it that she stays with her parents, who have a place outside Washington in Maryland somewhere. So yeah, I mean, that it's empty. And I think, what you're saying about the psychosocial dimension of it, am I the only person that noticed that the wrecker is not actually a wrecking ball? It's sort of like a long metal proboscis that is driven into the building over and over again? Okay.
Claire, what are you suggesting? Come on, let's
I don't know.
Connect the dots.
I don't know. What could it be? What could it be, Dr. Freud? All right, so let's go on to one method that Trump has said he might use to pay for this monstrosity. Taxpayers have footed the bill for numerous Trump vanity projects over the last 10 months, but this time he has suggested that he could pay for the ballroom with $230 million that he expects to receive from the federal government in damages from having been investigated and prosecuted for crimes he actually committed in the first term. So he is filing a claim on the federal government to get $230 million worth of damages. This claim will be handled by many of the lawyers who were his attorneys when he defended himself against those charges. So there are two aspects of this. One is he's taking money from the taxpayers to take away from the taxpayers. I mean, I don't even get it. Right. But he's suggesting that the ledger will be even somehow. But second of all, Trump has a very long history of promising various kinds of charitable donations that do not ever arrive, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, the consistent characteristic here is he's a pathological liar. So that applies in every single... it just seems worth saying over and over again, because we're like parsing every moment of this man, and understandably so, right? He's the president.
Right.
And yet there's just, it should be said that the most consistent thing about this person is that he lies all the time. So it's lying about what he's doing to a building. It's lying about donating to charities. There's so much that's wrong here in just the few things you've said. The extortion, essentially, or the grifting from the public, from taxpayers, just to put $230 million directly in his pocket, which he said is a number he just concocted in his head, right? Like he literally announced it. Like, I just came up with this number. This complete lie that he would pay for something that is of this, expense when hasn't paid for anything in his life. I mean, last week we were talking about how lawyers don't represent him because he's never paid for a legal bill. So there's a long, long pattern here that we see in a moment like this of all the different characteristics of his really, really broken psychology. But I think the sort of plain grifting, grifting in plain daylight, that probably is going to happen, right? I mean, maybe not $230 million, but they're going to give him something. And this is yet another enormous corner that we're turning and what's being allowed. And also by just the complete inaction of Congress around all this.
Right. And I can't even imagine, I mean, given how disabled the government will be when he's done with it, who would ever find all the money that is disappearing and recover it? I mean, it seems like a Herculean task. I would also say that we should probably rename this episode Pathological Liar, but but also this whole question of the snake eating its tail at this point. There was one press conference in which he announced this whole thing, and he said, I guess I'm really suing myself. Like, I've sued everybody else in the world. I've run out of people to sue, so now I'm going to have to sue myself. It's just nuts, and I don't really understand what Republicans think they are doing, what it is they think they are seeing. This has nothing to do with any kind of conservatism I ever understood, Neil.
No, absolutely not. There's this meme going around that I think kind of combines a lot of the things we've been talking about so far, that is something along the lines of, building a $230 million ballroom while you're caging children and, the sick are dying and the poor are hungry. Just feels like another French Revolution moment too. And I think it is so gross what is happening in so many different ways, but there's something about the ballroom and the plain grift that's happening that's really evocative of this moment and its particular cruelties and I think only again puts into relief the gross ineptitude, or it's not even aptitude, the gross capitulation of the Republican Party to this man's every whim.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's hard to even know what will we be saying 2 or 3 months from now. What is there left to say about any of this as he puts everything in his pocket? Well, let's return to one of our favorite Republican congresspeople who actually is saying a few things. We were talking a week or so ago about Marjorie Taylor Greene and how she was breaking with the Trump administration on a number of issues, primarily healthcare, that was a biggie, but also Gaza, Ukraine, and the Epstein files. Okay, so these are all really, really big issues facing the administration, and Marjorie Taylor Greene is telling them they're not cutting it. The question is, why? And you and I talked about that a little bit, and she has always said about herself, I'm really independent, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so there's a news story coming from the Daily Beast saying that one of the reasons she's doing this is that she actually really did want to run for governor of Georgia, and the White House refused to back her because they thought she would lose. On Wednesday, she was on Tucker Carlson's podcast, and she said, quote, I sometimes hate my own party. And she said that she blamed Republicans for the current government dysfunction. She's also complained about how women are treated in the GOP. And all of this may come back to her having been the good soldier and the Trump administration saying, no, you do not get to move on in your political career. What do you think, Neil? Do you think that's for real?
A lot. Yeah, it feels like that probably is what's driving a lot of this. I mean, I think, I feel like we're in this uncomfortable situation where like Marjorie Taylor Greene may become more and more sort of a hero figure, or at least, the one that
it's
we're
horrifying.
Like, oh, she does have a point here. It's like it felt better sort of the earlier moment of Trump's rise to power when like the principled never Trumpers were like the Republicans we could align with. But those folks have either entirely gone away or just they're so inconsequential that like this is what we're left with. And it's a very different, different attack on Trump and Trumpism from a very different person. But listen, I think, clocks are right, twice, as the expression goes. She's certainly pointing out some things that are true.
Yep.
And I guess, again, it's notable and admirable that this is sort of almost a lone Republican voice doing so. I also think that like she's very, very ambitious here. And so I think the ambition is a way in which one can understand how being the cheerleader for Trump worked for her for a long time, but how carving herself out as an anti-establishment candidate when the establishment becomes Trump also makes sense for an ambition, for her own ambition, right? Like Trump rose to power in part through this sort of anti-establishment ethos and fury that gets a bit tampered down when you actually are the president and you are the administration. And so I think it's also telling that she shared this message with Tucker Carlson because he too has navigated an anti-establishment path for himself to the far right of existing conservative media, the conservative media environment. So I think there's a little bit of that going on as well in her calculations.
I think that's right. I don't know whether you remember this, Neil, but many years ago in the first Trump administration, well, I guess Marjorie Taylor Greene was elected in 2020, and she was almost immediately kicked off all of her committees. Or was it 2020? No, it was 2018. Sorry about that. She was elected in 2018, and she was almost immediately kicked off all of her committees. And in that moment, she really had nothing to do. And one of the things that members of the Trump White House did at the time was reach out to her, because it's really by being a very junior person on committees that you learn how Congress functions and you learn how to write a bill and you learn what to do. And so there were various members of the Trump administration who are long gone who reached out to her and said, look, I will teach you. I will teach you what you need to do to actually be who you are, but do it in a way that doesn't get you kicked out of Congress. And so I think in that period, she learned a lot about how to manufacture this anti-establishment self who could still get along with an establishment, like don't follow AOC around and threaten her, for example. Mm-hmm. And now she feels she's ready. And they are putting a lid on it, which I think will sort of be a theme in our news focus, which is the question of, is there anywhere to go under Trumpism? I mean, do people just simply have a role that they are told to play, and are they allowed to go anywhere? So we're going to make that pivot to the news focus in a second. Do you want to jump on that, Neil?
Well, I was just going to say, I think that really sets up the heart of our conversation today about Vance, because I think that's like the big question is, does Trumpism serve the folks who served it so well? Right. I don't think it does, because I think there's only Trump can trump, right? But there will be variations of it. I just think it's a real question if the close service to Trumpism actually eats up those who were its biggest foot soldiers. We'll see. But I think Taylor Greene and Vance are two people that really will allow us to see how that question plays out in pretty in the coming years.
You know, I love the way you're putting that because, and this is going to seem like a stretch, but I'll bring it back into the conversation. I've been reviewing political scientist Nancy Fraser's book, Cannibal Capitalism. And one of the things she argues is that capitalism has reached a stage that Marx can no longer account for. And that what capitalism is doing is consuming the things that sustain it. So that, for example, student loan programs are beginning to guarantee that we will not have students in the near future because no one will be able to afford to take on these loans. Similarly, corporations are eating up resources that are not replaceable, and they're not willing to pivot to renewable resources and so on. Well, I think politics is doing that too in the way you're describing it, that Trumpism actually requires consuming vast amounts of political resources. Like one of the things we learned in the second Trump campaign was that small donor giving had plummeted because people were just tapped out. The idea that people could never be tapped out of $5 donations was destroyed by the way Trump did it, which is signing up people involuntarily for endless donations that they never noticed were disappearing from their bank accounts. So it is possible, I think we're beginning to see, for a political party to eat itself and its voters so completely that it kind of evaporates.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the snake eating itself a bit ago, and I think it's right that this is, I mean, I guess it's a bit of a question of is this Trumpism or is this something that's a bigger dynamic at work that has to do with our political systems and political structure? But it does seem like Trumpism is the causative disease for at least one of our political parties.
Yes, I think that's right. Well, let's make the pivot into talking about JD Vance, who we have been talking about for some time, and then you said last week we just have to do it, and it turned out to be perfect because Vance is very much in the news for having made excuses for the young Republicans. We heard that clip at the top of the show. He called them kids. He called them boys. He said it was pearl clutching. Before we really get into who J.D. Vance is, what was wrong with that account of what happened, Neil?
Well, these are not boys. I mean, I think, most of them were in their late 20s, if not even into their 30s. They have major positions. These aren't college kids. And I think I said last week, even if they were college kids, that's an age of accountability that doesn't excuse this type of behavior at all.
Right.
So that's my big problem with this. But I think it speaks to, or it allows Vance to advance a particular cultural critique that is consistent with a larger sort of culture wars framework that is highly gendered, that I think, he has really foregrounded in the last year or two. A lot of what folks who like Vance say they like about him is that he loves his family so much and he's such a good father and that he's prioritizing the family and fatherhood again. And so those moments like the childless cat lady, which I think a lot of us just read as so hateful, so misogynistic. So as I agree with you, I think anti-queer and sort of the suggestive nature of it, that like with the folks who are sort of predisposed to this cultural conservatism, they see it actually as sort of a harmless joke or even just a harmless comment about the world he wants to create, where the traditional monogamous heteronormative or heterosexual family is prioritized and privileged. And you know, I mean, there's a long history there on the right of that sort of heteronormative politics and the politics of this particular version and vision of the family, of the male-headed family.
Right.
But I think it also is sort of hard for me as not a fan of Vance, to see as consistent with him as a character and the way that he talks about his wife and his children. I mean, there seems to be almost like a hatred of his children and even of his wife that he's expressed in different moments, again, that are kind of presented as jokes. Like he's making jokes about like how unruly and difficult his children are and sort of similar versions with his wife. But I just see him as not the family type at all. He seems really, I think what I'll say about him generally is he strikes me as so inauthentic in all these different iterations of his public presentation. But clearly there's a real politics here that he's advancing in his discourse, and I think that also is tied to a lot of policy goals of the administration.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I just want to throw in that I think one of the things that's a little disconcerting is we almost never see Usha. She is seen getting on and off an airplane, arriving in a foreign country, arriving in an American city and so on, but she doesn't have any projects. She doesn't speak in front of any audience that we ever see. So if she is really an active second lady, she is being a second lady to exactly half the American people, because I never see her do anything. And on a certain level, I don't feel critical of that. She's a professional woman. She was a Supreme Court law clerk. She's too smart either to be raising 3 children by herself or to be simply a decorative object in the Trump White House. But it is a little odd to have a second lady for whom we have no explanation for why we do not see her. Maybe it's so she won't show up at the fact that Melania Trump is nowhere to be found either.
Maybe that. It's also, I think, perhaps part of this, that she's not white.
Right.
And there's really virulent racism constantly expressed towards Vance on social media from the far right because of his wife and his children, which is horrific and horrible and disgusting. And it's also part of the, terrible stew that Trump and Trumpism have cultivated. So I wonder if it's partly that. It does seem odd for a person who's clearly going to be running for president to have so much of to have his wife basically invisible, because you would think that and maybe it's just like, that will be rolled out in due time. But it is striking that a vice president with presidential ambitions doesn't have a more visible presence of his sort of full family. He certainly spends a lot of time online, but we don't have a lot of images of him with his wife and children.
Right. No, I think that's right. And I mean, one of the things I was researching as well is the whole question of immigration, because Usha's parents, like many parents of South Asian people her age, were professionals when they came here and came in on either the H-1B visa or some equivalent of the H-1B visa. And so that's kind of a contradiction for the administration as well, because they are trying to get rid of all immigration. They are putting H-1 visas out of reach, if they can, for a great many people by charging $100,000 a year for them. I think the other thing is that a kind of friendliness offensive or family offensive on the part of the Vances could go a long way to making him more popular. Vance has a terrible favorability rating. It is currently hovering at about 43%, which is about where the president's is as well. It hasn't budged much. He came in as the least liked vice presidential candidate since they have been tracking these things. People liked him less well than they liked Sarah Palin, which is really kind of astonishing because everybody made fun of Sarah Palin. Even John McCain hated Sarah Palin. 2 months ago, the Washington Monthly speculated that Vance was the least popular new VP in all of American history, in part because they said he's just obnoxious. So let's talk about why he comes off as so obnoxious.
He just kind of sucks, doesn't he? I mean, he's a try-hard, and he's, I think, not an authentic person.
Yeah.
As I've said before. And so that is something that I think people can suss out really easily.
Yeah.
You know, Americans have a good temperature gauge for inauthenticity, and he's vamping, right? He's trying to be this version of Trump, and he can't pull it off. Although that doesn't mean he's not doing some really gross things as he attempts this. But I think all of that really just shines through, and people spot it. He's that obnoxious class clown, that kid that just is trying to get attention and it's not working. I do wonder what sort of pivot he'll make when he runs for president, because I think that's always an option in American politics, is to like turn the corner and say, you know, and he'll say, I was there to support the president, and, you know, but I want to forge ahead with this new sort of, in this new direction. And then maybe that's when he presents himself as family man. I don't know, but I actually don't think Vance is the nominee in 2 years. What do you think?
Well, okay, so there are people out there saying it's going to be Marco Rubio, in which case I think the Democrats have it in the bag, because I don't think they can recycle Marco Rubio, and I don't think he has been permitted to do things in the administration that actually give him any kind of stature. I think it's going to be hard for Vance to win primaries. He's not a good campaigner. He doesn't have a constituency. The constituency that should be JD Vance's has locked on to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is what they want. They want a rich guy who does big, outrageous things, who is on television, who says, I love you, and makes them believe it. None of those things are true of JD Vance. I would also like to say that I think Trump projects a certain type of masculinity, which he sort of self-lampoons by putting all of these memes out there of him as a knight in shining armor, as a football player, as a wrestler, and so on and so forth. That would be silly for Vance. And I think Trump has something going with masculinity, with his own audience, that it is difficult for others to equal. I've also seen Donald Trump Jr. mentioned as a serious candidate. It's very hard to believe. But let me say, one feature of all of this, and I wonder if I can get you to talk about facial hair, Neil, because JD Vance grew a beard for this campaign. I think it's because he's got such a weak chin. Yes. And at the same time, Eric Trump and Donald Trump Jr. also grew beards, and they have weak chins. And Barron Trump has a weak chin. He'll probably grow a beard too. So even this sign of masculinity, which I think is intended to allude to all the sort of Greece and Rome classical stuff, conquistador stuff, it looks funny on him. I mean, he doesn't look terrible in a beard, but why the beard? Men don't really walk around with beards nowadays unless they're, you know, bears.
Yeah, yes.
You have a great chin, Neil. Don't grow a beard.
Thank you. I would not do that. My husband has often worn a beard, and he looks very good in it. He's
handsome in all ways.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay. I think it's sort of, I hadn't really connected that all three of those guys had beards. They look quite different on each of them. I think actually Don Jr. is the only one that really carries it off.
I agree.
Vance has also lost a lot of weight. And I think that's, again, something someone does when they are eyeing big political offices.
Right.
I also think the beard served a bit as a disguise for him as he was going through that weight loss,
Right.
which potentially is being aided by something like Ozempic.
Gotta
But
be.
I think, he had really, really soft, rounded features not long ago. And I think that the beard helped disguise that. The beard then becomes, though, a sort of part of the costume, right? As he positions himself with like the legs spread wide apart and him doing all this bro stuff. So I think it's probably here to stay.
Yep.
But it really does feel like a costume for him, something he's trying on, part of the shape shifting he's doing sort of constantly in front of us.
Yeah, agreed. Well, we're going to keep our eye on him, and we may return to JD Vance. I can't believe we're at least 2 years away from the next campaign starting, but we will return to JD Vance if and when he does anything that brings us back to these topics. So, Neil, what do you want to go viral this week?
Okay, well, again, I'm not sure if I want this to go viral as much as I want to talk about it, because that framework for this part of our podcast assumes some sort of endorsement on our part. But
True.
I actually do want one thing to go viral, which is this article I'm going to talk about. But first, I want to say, Claire, do you watch Love is Blind?
No, should I?
Oh my gosh, do you know what Love is Blind is?
No.
Okay, this is one of
my God.
Netflix's biggest reality shows. It's now in its 9th season.
Well, I've read about it. Yes. And they got sued, didn't they?
Well,
all right, tell
maybe,
everyone
I don't
about
know.
it. Yeah.
There's a million things happening. It's a blockbuster juggernaut for Netflix. It's a reality show. There's variations of it now where it's like Love is Blind UK, Love is Blind Germany, like Love is Blind Japan. I mostly just watched the US version and also the UK one. But the concept of it's a dating show, but it's Love is Blind. So the dating initially happens in these pods where you go in to a pod, and on the other side of the wall is, and this is only for heterosexuals, is, a woman or a man, and you date them blind. And you continue to do so. And and I think there's like 32 men, 32 women. So there's all these different, you're dating all these different people, but then you're getting more and more sort of into and attracted to certain people. So then you keep dating them. You sort of narrow your pool down. And ultimately, what this is supposed to do is lead to a proposal for marriage. When a man proposes to a woman, because that's how this show works, then they get to meet in person and see who it is that they've actually committed the rest of their life to. And then those couples, usually it's only like 4 to 6 couples actually make it to this stage. They get flown off to like a resort in Mexico for a week where they're thrown into a hotel room together, and it's like they now get to explore their physical attraction and whether or not they actually like this person they were intellectually and emotionally attracted to, like across the wall, they have any sort of physical connection with. And then it takes them from that resort back to the town they're from. They're always drawn from the same town. So like this season 9, they're all from Denver. And so the point of that is like they can all move back to the place they actually live, and they move into an apartment together for like 3 weeks. And then the conclusion is whether or not they actually get married. So that's the premise of the show. 9 different seasons from all these different cities. This season is dark. And the thing that I want to go viral is this piece in people.com, which is not a magazine I usually read, but the headline, the title of it is so good. The title is, I thought the Ed Gein story would give me the creeps, but Love is Blind 9 is the scariest thing on Netflix right now. And it just talks about how particularly dark this season is. And there's all sorts of different examples of this, like really incompatible couples that continue the conversation and they end up getting engaged, and some really awful things that transpire from that, including some really, I think, racist moments on the show. We've had glimpses of that in seasons past. Some like really, really overly sexual language in the pods that also feels a departure from previous seasons. But one thing that this article doesn't mention, which I think is the biggest infraction of this particularly horrible season, is this conversation that one couple has where the guy ask a question to the girl, what would you do if you had an LGBTQ kid? And she pauses for such a long time And then ultimately with like just a scowl on her face says, well, I guess I'll love my kids no matter what, but like this is something I would never accept. And then they continue to have this extended conversation about how this is something that just isn't right, how something that I think the woman says at some point, something like, I would tell my kid that like, this doesn't really exist. This is a made up thing.
Wow.
It's a stunning scene to watch in 2025. I'm really surprised this article didn't point it out. And that just allows me to raise my bigger point, which is I think in the last year or so, we've seen, especially in reality television, turning of the corner when it comes to a lot of LGBTQ conversations, and where that sort of polite bigotry of the last decade or two is really being sort of openly expressed now. And I think we had this enormous cultural shift of the last 20 years where everyone sort of got on board with a polite way of speaking about homosexuality in public, regardless of personal beliefs, that I think was problematic in its own way, but that signaled a huge cultural shift that I think a lot of us benefit from. I think we're turning away from that, from that sort of cultural moment into one in which openly expressing like plainly anti-LGBTQ sentiments is going to become increasingly normalized. And so, I don't know, I just wanted to sort of put my finger on that and say that I think we are in this moment of cultural shift and we'll see where it goes. But this season of Love is Blind made that really visible to me.
Wow. And it so locks into what we've been talking about today in terms of the Republican Party, which is just sort of like pulling the blinds off and, letting you see what's really going on there. I mean, the Young Republicans' texts were like, yes,
exactly.
This is what they really talk about. This is how they really speak. And then you dig a little bit deeper and it's like, oh, there's an American flag with a swastika hanging in his office in Congress. And, so I think that's fascinating. And I think the big question is politics leading or is culture leading? But I think as these big television companies begin to pivot toward Trumpism and the kinds of profits that are to be made under Trumpism, I think we're going to be seeing more of this. And the question is, will it be leading the culture or will it be following the culture? All right, I'm going to watch. I'm going to watch this season.
I want to just make that. I just want to build on that last point you made because I think that's really, to me, I thought, okay, I'm sure these scenes have happened many a time, but it seemed like a certain production decision to not edit that scene out. To like actually include it along with a lot of other things. It feels a little bit of that sort of cultural turning of the ship towards a thing that's more accommodating of Trumpism and more, but also think raises this question of like which one is leading here, culture or politics? Which one's the chicken and the egg? In this dynamic.
Right. Well, and one of the things we know about reality shows is that they have a raft of assistant producers who are always trying to push controversy, who are always trying to get people to cry, who are always trying to create highly emotional moments, which is, now I recall, why this television show ended up in court, because one of the people on one of the early seasons turned out to be a serial sexual abuser and really bad person. And the woman who he was paired up with then discovered this when they were basically like trapped in one of those Mexican resorts. And she kept saying, I want to go. And the assistant producers kept saying, no, you can't go. You can't leave yet. He's really okay. And she ended up suing them because she said, first of all, they should have known. They should have investigated his background before they let him on the show. And second of all, when I said I wanted to go, they should have let me go. And they weren't letting me go. So it will be interesting to see if the kinds of things that are creating these conflict in political culture are then sort of co-opted by the reality shows and reproducing themselves. Yeah, wow. All right, I'll watch it. So what I want to go viral this week, and I do kind of endorse it, is Lily Enolik's book, Didion and Babbitts. Came out last year. It's now out in paperback. It's about Joan Didion and Eve Babbitts, two women who are sort of in a way, mirror images of each other. They both grow up in California. They're both very identified with California. They're both very identified with Hollywood. And yet they were so different. Eve Babbitt was very counterculture, very much part of the bohemian scene. She didn't work as a prostitute exactly, but she was very sexual, sort of slept with anyone. At one point, Enolich says, Joan Didion had a husband, and Eve Babbitt had a husband too. It's just he wasn't her husband. He was someone else's husband. And Didion, on the other hand, had this very straight-laced, very confined, very managed affect, but was wildly ambitious in some of the same ways that Babbitt was ambitious, was part of that Southern California scene. And in fact, Babbitt and Didion meet at a huge party that Didion throws, and everybody's there. Like Janis Joplin is there, Harrison Ford is there, just everybody you would want to meet in Southern California in 1967 is at that party, and Eve Babbitt is there as well. And they become friends, and they correspond with each other. And Enolich, who had written a biography of Eve Babbitt, is now writing about the relationship between these two women and the ways in which they spoke to each other about art. And obviously Didion's art was her writing, but she was also very involved in popular culture through screenwriting with her husband, John Gregory Dunn. Babbitt decided at one point that she would never marry. She got involved with all of these married men. They serially disappointed her, serially broke her heart. And at a certain point, she said, you know what? I'm not suited for this. Marriage is obviously terrible for men, or they wouldn't be here sleeping with me. And so together, Didion and Babbitt begin to talk about what it means to be a woman and an artist. And there is this trove of letters that Enolich is working off of, which Babbitt saved. Babbitt died in a studio apartment in West Hollywood that was just filled with crap. Wow. And Enolich was given these letters by a relative that were all boxed up and said, okay, do what you want with them. So what we have here is a kind of double biography of two women in conversation with each other, both of whom are building personas that will become sort of symbolic of California in the 1960s and 70s, both the beauties of California and the ways in which it's really dark and scary. I would say that there's very little that connects women of my generation to women in their 20s, connects conservative women to liberal and radical women. That one thing is Joan Didion. All of us who write are completely involved with Joan Didion. And Eve Babbitt comes in a close second. I mean, if you're really sitting and talking to somebody about women who were not feminists or self-identified feminists in the 1960s and 70s, but who made it possible for women to be artists and writers, Eve Babbitt is right in there. So I absolutely recommend this book. It's a great read. It is not a conventional biography, and it's very, very high style in some important ways. I mean, Enolich is right in there as a character in the book as the author. So, Lily Enolich, Didion and Babbitt, Scribner 2024. You can pick it up in paperback. There will be a link to it that goes to bookshop.org. Please buy either from Bookshop or from your local independent bookstore. Do not buy from Amazon because they run crappy farms that go down and take your Venmo down. And with that, Neil, I think we've gotten to the end.
All right. See you next week, Claire.
See you next week, Neil.
All right. Ooh. Look.
And that's it for today's show. Thanks for hanging out with us. Share this podcast with a friend who loves history, politics, and smart conversation. You can follow Neil and me on Threads, Blue Sky, X, TikTok, and Instagram. Go to the Political Junkie Substack at clairepotter.substack.com for show notes, more episodes, to leave a comment or question, to subscribe for free, or to support our work for as little as $5 a month. You can also subscribe for free by searching for this podcast on your favorite platform. If you do, please leave a rating and a comment so that other listeners can find us. This podcast is supported by the New School for Social Research and by paying subscribers. Political Junkie is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me, Claire Potter. Today's theme is I Got That Wow by Ivy States. You can find their work and all the talented artists we feature on these episodes on Soundstripe. That's all for now. See you next week.
Yo, I got a monkey. Break next when I strut to my own beat. Yeah, I'm putting on a show when it's all free. Ay, catch me in the spotlight. I can't get enough, do this all night. Alright, hard likes, no hate. Ay, ay. Gas me up, no brakes. Wait, if you want that, whoa.